Everybody can see just great. Wonderful. All right. Well, we're going to hop right in if that's okay. I'll introduce myself and then turn some time over to Robert to introduce himself as well. My name is Andrew Fisher. I currently serve as Vice President of Academic Affairs at NHTI, which is a community college in Concord, New Hampshire. Robert.
Hi, so my name is Robert Bajer. I'm the founder of Micro-Credential Multiverse, and I got my link down there. I've worked on a number of micro-credentialing projects over the last 10 years or so, and I started out as a classroom educator, as a biology teacher in New Jersey, and I worked for Digital Promise, working on their educator micro-credential initiative, and I've also worked for Concentric Sky Badger, who was recently acquired by Instructure. So they're going to be called Canvas Credentials, I believe. And now I own my own company. So it's a pleasure to join you all.
Very, very good. Just want to do a quick check. Laura, are we in fact recording like we're supposed to be?
Yes, we are. And at the top of the hour, I took care of that.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Well, yesterday and today and some time ahead, we've had some opportunity to experience something called Space Camp, which is what Shaping EDU has put together to provide an idea about or opportunity to have conversation about what the future of education should be like. And so we'd like to explore that a little bit more today and maybe take advantage of the opportunity to have a space and time continuum and take everybody back to the year 2010. So there was a grand experiment that was started somewhere around 2010, and it was based around Mozilla's Drumbeat Festival. There was a seminal paper that was written at the same time period by Aaron Knight about the idea for digital credentialing, providing badges as solutions for learning and documentation of learning. And this was explored pretty extensively within the Mozilla Drumbeat Festival. And then subsequently for a handful of years, there was a lot of work that was done by Mozilla on the development of something called open badges, an open badging protocol. Specifically within the paper that was written, there was a call that for management and governance of this space, we knew that there needed to be some kind of a digital icon that would be tied to these badges themselves. We knew that they needed to be built with some type of an assessment structure in place. That badges don't just come raining down from the sky like the monsoons of Arizona, but rather it's a demonstration of performance. And also that there needed to be built some type of an infrastructure that would support both the advancement of these badges, both in professional spaces, but also in the issuance and maintenance of these badges themselves. And so with that foundation, I think it'd be a really interesting question to ask where everybody was when this was going on. So at the time that the paper was published in 2010, I'll share where I was. I was a department chair over a developmental studies department in rural East Texas at a community college that had enrollment where we had just barely peaked 1,200, and we thought we were high on the hog because we finally broke through that number 1,200. It was a rural community college that had a lot of needs, specifically with regards to learning. And so I was quite busy on the developmental side of the house. And I think somewhere in the 60% or so of students who went through the institution graced the presence of some of the developmental education courses. It was also this time that I was teaching 3 different classes, one developmental math class, one developmental reading class, and one developmental writing class, all at the same semester. And so it was quite the experience. Also for me at this time, and this is when we were going through regional accreditation again, as through the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools. Some may be associated or know that organization. That may be your regional accreditor. And we were really struggling with learning documentation, how it was to demonstrate that the students have actually acquired the knowledge that we say that they're acquiring through our course level outcomes. So that's where I was in 2010. Robert, where were you?
Yeah, I was a classroom educator in 2010. So I think it was my first year as a teacher. And I remember, transitioning. I actually have a background in science. I was working in biotech and laboratories in New Jersey. And when I transitioned to becoming a teacher, I was astonished that the professional development really hadn't changed much from when my mom started as a teacher, like 20 years before that. So I was looking for ways to improve my own practice. And along the way, I found some opportunities to engage with the educator community across the United States and build digital promises system for how competency-based learning can be recognized at scale.
Yeah, fantastic. I see Dave Thomas in here. David, you've been in the space for a while. Where were you in 2010? Do you mind if we put you on the spot?
Not at all. I was trying to think where I was in 2010. You know, I have trouble remembering my birthday. But I do know I was running the online programs for CU Denver and arguing with people constantly that online was going to be you know, an important component of the future. And so that's what stands out the most to me in terms of this. And the whole idea of anything around micro credentials, that didn't even exist. I don't know what those were. Those were lessons. They called them lessons.
I love it. Was anybody actively engaged in this space in 2010, looking at micro credentials, digital credentials, badging? Anybody?
Yeah, throw your take in the comments if you're not sure in the chat box.
So from that time period forward, the use of open badges as a concept or use of badging as a concept really took off. And so now here we are some 12 years later, we know that there's been more than 50 million open badges that have been awarded from either different institutions, employers, different publishers, all across different sectors. And so that's quite a wide impact. But also we see that with this growth, wild growth of use of digital credentials and micro-credentialing, that there continue to be some questions about what some of the aspects are that are tied directly to these micro-credentials. And so when we think about where we are as within the space, there definitely appears to be a strong need for some type of a toolkit to help provide not only resources for those that are developing micro-credentials, but also solutions for folks that are up against some pretty serious problems that they're trying to solve with micro-credentials. Those that have been around for a little bit, you've probably perused some of the available toolkits that are out there. Toolkits that have been provided by either third-party vendors, that have been provided by conglomerations of like higher education officials that have gotten themselves and organized themselves together to come up with some of these definitions, or maybe even some toolkits that have come forward from state agencies and national agencies. What we've noticed is that they all tend to have the same basic flavor, which is almost like a call and response, to where we have a concept or we have a word and we've provided a definition. And sometimes that definition or the response to that concept or to the word is decontextualized. And so when asked a question of, well, what the heck is an open badge? Oftentimes in these toolkits, you get responses that are very direct and provide very technical definitions to what an open badge is, but doesn't talk about how open badges can be employed within a space, why open badges may be important response instead of maybe a verifiable credential at this point. It doesn't provide any situational or contextual information to any questions that are out there. And so with this in mind, we decided that there may be an opportunity for development. Robert, you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I've seen lots of organizations, governments, like basically try to reinvent the wheel over and over again. Like, how can we answer these questions? And I think the contextual piece that you mentioned is what a lot of those things either lack entirely. So they say, what's an open badge? Well, it's a structured metadata with an image over it. And, then people's eyes start to glaze over and they're like, oh yeah, metadata, like I know about that. So like there's that side of things. But then there's almost too specific of context in some of these frameworks or toolkits where they're mention it through the specific lens of an institution and a use case in a country, that maybe isn't applicable to what you would want to do. So it's not necessarily like an out-of-the-box toolkit that you could use, right, to benefit from best practices and experiences from folks around the world who are working on this idea and operationalizing it at scale.
Yeah. So behold, Shaping EDU. We have some veterans to the Shaping EDU emerging credentials work that are among us, and so we may call on some expertise. But let's take a run in onto how we got where we are right now. And so previously, a group of like-minded professionals got together as part of Wicked Problems conference and series of events, and started to discuss the need for development in the space for emerging credentials, is what we were calling it at the time. That we knew that there needed to be some type of some definitions that are provided as centering points for discussions in this area, but there need to be further advancements in the conversation to provide some of these contextual discussions. And so what this group did is they got together and developed a pitch for something called the Pinte Challenge. And the Pinte Challenge was something that was put on by ASU, and it was some money that was set aside specifically for the development of solutions in some key areas. So the Emerging Credentials group, if you are in that Emerging Credentials group, raise your hand. Laura, raise your hand too. Allison? Yeah, and so you've got four of us here that were part of this group, and under David and Allison's leadership, this group met for probably close to a year in preparation for the Pinte Pitch Challenge to identify needs or solutions for two basic needs. And one was the development of a toolkit, and the other one we'll talk about in a second was a conference of sorts that would allow for further development in this space. And so this group met weekly for a long period of time, fleshing this discussion out. And so we got together in February as part of the Pinte Pitch Challenge. We got to work with key artists, presentation enthusiasts, and trainers, as well as speech coaches. Allison and I had a great time with a speech coach that taught us how to provide presentations in more engaging ways. And then we employed all of the tools that we learned in a Shark Tank-like pitch to a series of professionals who held the keys to the resources. And we went to them and we asked for money for the development of a toolkit, but also for the development of a summit specifically to support this work. And they graciously provided us with funding. So in that competition, we got a place. What place did we end up getting? Second.
I'll say 2.
Yeah, we got second place in this open competition, which is fantastic. And we're able to receive funding to develop the toolkit. So as also part of that Pinte Challenge, you can see the visualization of the work that we did is that not only in describing the story, do we have a lot of mess in regards to ironing out some of these key definitions, words, and implications and support systems, into which we need a key online toolkit to help make sense of it, but also that this mini summit would build an ongoing community that would continue to support both the implementation of the toolkit, but also provide a more detailed information for that toolkit. So we did have that summit. That summit happened on April 26th, and it was amazing. It was great to see a large turnout of folks who were engaged and interested in understanding more about emerging credentials and micro-credentials, and then how the cross-section of future employment really intersects with emerging credentials. Part of that program focused specifically on higher education. Part of it focused on employers, and we had employers from across the nation that were able to participate and talk about the vision that they saw for credentialing solutions. And then also we heard from professionals in the field who helped build the technology behind that bridges the gap between what Mozilla started with open badges and where we are now. We had a lot of the professionals that were hands-on tech with regards to developing the systems. They were a part of this mini conference as well, this mini summit as well. And it was a fantastic experience. So now we get into, with that background in mind, the actual building of the micro-credential toolkit.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the key aspects associated with the micro-credential toolkit. So firstly, to address that contextual element that we've been hitting on is to develop personas. And no matter what ecosystem you're talking about, if it involves micro-credentials, there's generally 3 key personas. So these are students, that's persona number 1. It's the one we know and love. Sometimes we also call this earners. So these are the people who are earning the digital badges that are being awarded in that particular ecosystem. So students, learners, earners, they go by many names, but these are the folks who are earning the awards. The second group is issuers. So who's awarding the digital credentials, who's awarding the micro-credentials. So these can be institutions, these can be employers. You know, there are a lot of use cases where different folks will award digital credentials, and they're essentially responsible for verifying the skills and competencies that those credentials represent. So there's also an assessment element associated with the issuer persona. And then finally, we have employers or recognizers. So you might hear the word currency used in these conversations. So when you're thinking about a familiar currency like a US dollar or an Australian dollar or a euro or something like that, basically what can you exchange those micro-credentials for? So the recognizers are generally the stakeholders who embed those credentials with market value, so that when learners earn credentials from issuers, they can actually trade those, they can share those to get some outcome, whether it's an employment outcome, an employer, or an academic outcome, maybe entryway to an academic pathway. There are a lot of there are a lot of use cases there, but generally those are the 3 stakeholders. We have students, learners, earners. We have issuers. In some cases, these are the institutions. And then we also have recognizers. And the example that we're using here is employers. Another key aspect of the micro-credential toolkit is that they're built from a community of practitioners. So these are folks who are actually using micro-credentials in the field and understand contextually relevant how these can be applied and earned and shared, and then reinforcing those recognizer networks, those employer networks, things like that, sort of bridging that gap between issuers and employers on behalf of the students, right? So the toolkit is going to be built from a community of practitioners, and we'll get to that later. We're going to invite everyone to weigh in. And then next, it's interactive. So we don't want to hand people, a 150-page document or something and say, have at it, like find your answers. So this needs to be something that's engaging, something that's interactive, something that lends itself well to discovery, because for a lot of folks, they're sort of discovering, all these different mechanics in real time. So, and then finally, it's relevant. So we want to provide folks with very tangible, very actionable exemplars for how they can apply what they learn in the real world, and that it's relevant to their specific use case. All right, cool. So those are just our high level sort of aspects of the toolkit. So let's look at a specific key question. So a question that likely comes up pretty frequently is, who should be able to see a micro-credential? And it seems like a very straightforward question, but depending on who you ask, you might get a very different answer. And this can help reveal something about the different personas associated with an ecosystem that you're building. Should every micro-credential be open for everyone to see? And before I get into these examples, I just want to provide you with a quick example of when I was at Digital Promise. So Digital Promise built a micro-credentialing platform. In fact, I think in this track, Nick is going to be speaking to that. He currently works for Digital Promise. So if you want to jump to that after this session, it might be a really great complement to what I'm about to tell you. But when we were developing the micro-credential initiative at Digital Promise, we were very sensitive to the idea that educators, who in this case were the learners, right? They were the earners, they were earning the digital badges from a community of issuers, and they range from National Geographic to, Relay School, Graduate School, and Project Management Institute. So in that case, they were the issuers. But basically, when an educator earned an award, did they want everyone to see that award? But more importantly, what part of the micro-credential did they want people to see? So if you share your award on LinkedIn, you don't want to share your assessment, your evaluation. You might not want to even share your evidence because it's sensitive information. It might actually contain personally identifiable information for students. So you have to be very careful about how you're building the ecosystem. So when we were developing that product, that platform, we were very sensitive to the needs of the earners, or in this case, the learners, the students. And we were also thinking very much about, the folks who are awarding the digital badges. So let's just look at some responses here from these stakeholders. So, and these are more generalized than the digital promise example. So for students, they don't think that they want everyone to see their micro-credential because they're concerned that they might be judged. So this is similar to educator stakeholders in the digital promise ecosystem. So can I selectively choose which micro-credentials I show to whom and how? So these are really important considerations during the discovery process of any micro-credentialing program. Furthermore, you have issuers. So should our institution allow students to show only part of their micro-credential? So like I said before, do you want to share the entire micro-credential? Do you want to share the assessment? Do you want to share the feedback, the evidence? Some of these aspects of, and I'm going to use this word again, the metadata can be selectively chosen and shared in a variety of ecosystems. And when you're considering each stakeholder within your ecosystem, you certainly want to make sure that you're doing some of this due diligence up front. And the toolkit is designed to make this a lot easier. Finally, we're looking at employers. So once someone has earned the award, once the issuer has awarded the award, the employer, I see that an applicant has a lot of micro-credentials and have shared everything that they've done. There's a lot to sort through. Maybe someone shares, 20 micro-credentials. I think the average for digital promises ecosystem was something like 5 or 6 micro-credentials. So do you want to share all of those, or do you only want to share some of those? I mean, anyone who sent out a resume can tell you that, well, they want to tailor what they're sharing to the opportunity that they're pursuing. So an ecosystem should support that story, that use case. And the toolkit, again, is designed to sort of shed light on best practices and what some of these stakeholders might be thinking to save a lot of time and to create some coherence between the types of ecosystems that will emerge from the use of the toolkit. Okay, next slide. So, and I'm really excited about this, guys. So we're gonna ask you all to take a survey later, and some folks have already taken the survey, but we're gonna take this information and we're gonna compare the survey responses for similarities and points of differentiation. In some cases, participants might be quoted directly, so you would give us permission to do that. But as a teacher, I was thinking to myself, what's the worst question you can ask a classroom of students or any group of people who have just learned something new? The worst question you can ask is, do you have any questions? It's the best way to hear the sound of crickets. So I decided, you know what, I've been developing this artificial intelligence system with my company, Micro-Credential Multiverse, and it's geared towards facilitating these very conversations about micro-credentials. So when you engage with the survey, or when anyone engages with the survey, we'll be asking them, specific questions that are aligned with their particular persona or their use case. But we're also going to provide some responses from AI. So go ahead and just take a second and read from the bottom here. The question, as a student, how do micro-credentials relate to my degree? What you see beneath that is essentially the AI response that our AI provided. And we want to provide these responses for 2 main reasons. Number one, there's no reason you should reinvent the wheel. If you don't know too much about micro-credentials, it can be very difficult to answer this question in a very meaningful way. So on the one hand, this sort of greases the wheel for, okay, well, this is sort of, how you might want to think about this question. The second thing and this is just something that occurred to me recently, is that, as you're going through the survey, you're learning, right? You can benefit from learning from these AI responses. They've all been reviewed by members of the team, by myself. These are legitimate answers. So as you're going through, on the one hand, you're providing information that's going to benefit everyone who uses the toolkit. And on the other hand, you're also going to have opportunities to expand your own knowledge about how, certain folks might answer these questions and what some of those questions might include, those key terms that would occur to a student that might not occur to an issuing organization or an employer. So I really encourage you guys to go through that survey. We're going to send you that at the tail end of this presentation. And if you go through and write responses out, every time you click that next button, you're going to see an AI response that can help inform your own understanding about micro-credentials and how you can start connecting the dots.
So the work ahead with this, the work ahead is to gather resources from practitioners in the field. Sometimes it'll be from professionals who help build the actual architecture that supports the system. And sometimes it will be from students who are consumers. And sometimes it'll be from business owners who are employing digital credentials or micro-credentials in the space. And sometimes it'll be from us. Right. And the more information that we can put into the system, the stronger the toolkit is going to be. I think one of the benefits of providing this type of a solution is it is not a call and response. These are contextualized questions that allow you to be more thoughtful in providing solutions, because the context really does matter, because the context being driven by the individual persona, the lens through which you're going to be interpreting the questions. But once we have this information, then we'll be able to draw some strong connections. We'll be able to identify that folks who are looking at this question and have these questions likely will have the following questions as well. And we'll know that by mapping of experiences within the toolkit. And so we'll be able to provide a cohesive pathway over time to help respond to some very difficult questions that are out there. For me, one of the biggest ones that's out there is okay, I want to get into micro-credentials, but I don't really even know where to start, right? And so if a newbie in the space asks somebody who's been around since 2010 or 12 or 2015, that 2015 is going to have a lot of information to share, and that's not going to be particularly helpful for the newbie who's just starting down the road. But with an interactive and immersive toolkit that's designed around specific connections that we know are logically there, then we can provide a landscape through which folks who have specific questions can navigate, find not only answers to their questions, but also be led to further questions that will help them contextualize the experiences that they have, and to make sure that they're not stepping in spaces with black voids underneath them, right? So all the knowledge that exists in the space right now has been hard-fought knowledge. The reason why I love working with folks that are in the micro-credential and digital credential space is that we've all made a million errors, and we've all said things that later we've had to go back and go, oh, whoops, I guess I didn't mean it when I said it that way, because we are all discovering this space together. And so there is a lot of grace for anybody stepping into the space who's learning about how to use micro-credentials, how to use digital credentialing solutions, and how to support an institutional call for a request in this area. So we hope that this toolkit provides some measure of help and support for folks in that situation. But here's the deal, is that we need your help. That's right, you, each and every one of you, we need your help. And so we're asking that you please participate in this survey. I'm going to drop it in the chat as well. Thomas Paine, you remember Thomas Paine? Maybe not, because none of us were around when he was around, but he was a kind of a famous historian and pamphleteer. And he had a quote, and his quote, that he says that those that must undergo the fatigues of supporting liberty, those that expect the blessings of freedom must undergo the fatigues of supporting it. I knew that it was in there somewhere. Thank you, undergraduate history. And so I think if we all want to be a part of an ecosystem that provides support for the development of microcredentials and the implementation of microcredentials, we all need to be active parts of that community in lifting where we can and carrying what's right in front of us. And so here we have that opportunity. So you are highly encouraged to participate in the survey, no matter what your skill level, knowledge level is. You'll be able to indicate that in the survey. And then once you get into the personas, we encourage you to answer a handful of these. Right now, the information deck or the question deck is sitting at a whopping, I think, 47 or 48 persona questions. If you got the time and you want to tackle each one of them, by all means. But if you could engage a handful of them, 3, 4, 5 of these questions that are built around specific personas, then just scroll down to the bottom and hit submit. And then in the future, if you want to come back and take the survey again, you're more than welcome to do that. It'll be populated with new questions each time you come back. But without participation from everybody within the space, then it's going to be hard for us to drive a toolkit and to build a toolkit that is fully representative of the space. And so with that, I think we're happy to answer questions, but only after you've clicked on this link. You have to prove that you clicked on this link before we'll answer a question.
Andrew and Robert, are you wanting questions typed into the chat, or are you wanting people to unmute? We have 27 total participants.
I mean, we're pretty low key. There's only 27 of us. So.
Yeah, I think maybe unmuting, but maybe raising hands so that we can sort of track that everybody, gets to have a voice.
Yeah, I would say one of two ways. So either throw your question in the chat or Amanda is raising her hand. This way it elevates your picture as well, so we can see you at the very top with everybody else. So yeah, without further ado.
Hi, thank you. I was just hoping that the 2010 article you were referencing, could you either give me the name of it or do you have a link to it?
Yeah, I'll drop it in the chat. I've got to leave this up though. And so I'll drop it in the chat right at the end.
Thank you.
You bet.
Yeah, and there have been a number of publications over the last 10 years that cover everything from microcredential frameworks to standards, definitions. Around the world, there have been standards documents endorsed by nations, in Europe, the UK, New Zealand, Australia. There's really great work going on all over the world. So there's a wealth of information out there. And again, the point of the toolkit is to take all these best practices, to take all of these learned experiences and to translate them into something that's very quickly actionable. That's something that can be translated into action on behalf of a diverse number of different community types, whether we're talking about employer networks or academic networks, or even K-12, or some people say K to career networks. So yeah, there's a lot of information out there. And if you want to connect with Andrew or I, after the call, you can reach me on LinkedIn, and I'd be happy to find some information that might be able to help you out. Cool.
Amanda,
you want to add anything?
follow-up? Yeah, was there a follow-up question, Amanda?
No, I'm pretty familiar with microcredentialing, but I just haven't seen that article.
Sure. Yeah. Yep, absolutely. Happy to share it. Adam, my friend, what's happening? How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you doing?
Very good.
So I'm curious, when we think about the value of microcredentials for all three personas, in some cases, I wonder, does it presuppose that there is some sort of standardization or common language around the skills or competencies that those microcredentials are representing? And if that's the case, which I think in many cases it probably should be, are there, I hear about skills taxonomies and different ones, right? Are there prevailing sort of skills taxonomies that are starting to take real strong root and that we should be tied to? I mean, I'm, for example, I've explored like MC skills, and I know, Robert, I've seen on your blog that you've talked about those a lot, and I like them. At the same time, they're super specific and sometimes kind of vague. On the other hand, right, you have NACE competencies and things like that, which are really, really vague, and lots of things could fit into it. So, what's the middle ground between sort of problem solving and critical thinking and I know how to use this particular function in this particular piece of software? What's the middle ground, and sort of how are we? What's the sort of process and state of being and sort of getting to agreed upon point?
Yeah. Robert, you want rock, paper, scissors to see who gets to go first?
Okay. All right. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Okay,
Rock,
here we go.
paper, scissors.
Rock, paper, scissors, shoot.
Oh, close. Tie goes to you. Go for it.
All right. So this is a good question, Adam. So this is like, there's a lot of work happening right now around this. So before I say anything, I want to say that the jury's still out about the granularity, which is like at a high level, how I frame these conversations is like, what is the granularity of a micro-credential? How micro is micro? And depending on who you ask in different parts of the world, if you're calling what you're doing micro-credentials in the UK, for example, then they need to align with the qualification framework between levels 4 and 7. And there's an equivalency with academic units specifically that inform that alignment. Okay, that being said, the United States is a little bit like the Wild West, and I'm actually calling in from Texas, so I have an appreciation for things that are both rootin' and tootin'. So here in the United States, the jury's still out about what exactly a micro-credential is. You can make a lot of things that are called micro-credentials. And what I will say, as someone who's been in the space for a long time, or as long as it's existed for the most part, is the famous "it depends," right? It really depends on the recognizers, right? So we talked about learners, we talked about issuers. It depends on the recognizers. It depends on what is the smallest unit of market value that a recognizer is willing to exchange something like a micro-credential in return for some career opportunity or some academic opportunity, if in this case the recognizer is an institution of higher education or something. So it depends. Now, here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to go one step further. So when we talk about skills, I actually talk about MZ a lot on my blog, mostly because they have a very coherent strategy, and I happen to very much appreciate how they came up with their taxonomy. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about how they came up with their taxonomy. They basically crawled the entire internet and they said, what skills are in job postings, which I think is a great place to start. Like, what skills are people actually signaling to recognizers that they need in return for a job? And they sort of have taken a skills clusters approach, which I like a lot. And it's not exclusive to MZ. Anybody can do this. So basically what you do is you take something like, a SOC code, right? Or you use a zip code, or you use some code that's associated with like a larger sector of the economy. Like, according to the government, there's really only 1,000 different jobs if you look at all those codes, right? There's only so many codes. But in reality, there are way more than 1,000 different jobs out there. And if you look regionally between California and New York, sometimes you'll find job listings, same name, different skills. So it's also very subjective between recognizers. So here's how I would approach that. I really like the fact that there are things like soft skills. So like enduring skills, power skills, soft skills, there are lots of names for these. Things like collaboration, active listening, interpersonal communication, empathy. These everybody needs. And in my opinion, this is really what colleges do a really good job of. They contextualize soft skills through the lens of a particular skill or practice. That's why college degrees are still the gold standard for macro certification kind of thing. But there's also technical skills. And technical skills can be something like getting Zoom going, right? Like hosting a webinar is a technical skill. And right now it's a hot technical skill because of the state of the economy. But those technical skills have sort of a shorter half-life. they have a shorter expiration date because, you know, innovation marches on, right? So every year there's a litany of new technical skills that someone might need to upskill or reskill or get a promotion. So that's really where micro-credentials come in. And I think the best version of micro-credentials combine contextually appropriate soft skills with market relevant, like economically relevant technical skills that unlock opportunities. And one way of doing that on a technical basis, just to end my little soliloquy here, is rich skill descriptors. So you're seeing this work happening in a variety of places, but essentially combining these skills that can be added to micro-credentials, like, you know, project management and active listening, like the actual little skills that you can click on and you can find jobs, you can put them in your resume. It adds clarity to people who earn them. But also the competency associated with those skills, which I know for employers specifically, they're very curious about. How has someone applied this skill? Not do they know it, but how have they applied it? And how can they signal that application of skill, that competency, to me, the recognizer who's looking to hire a new welder, right? Or a mechanic or a nurse, right? So that is as short as possible about granularity of micro-credentials, specifically talking about skills and competencies. It's a great question. It could take up a whole 45 minutes, probably more. So thank you for that, Adam. I hope that sort of answered your question. It was a little bit of a safari.
It does, you know, I see a tension between institutions of higher education in particular, thinking we need to help students better articulate the value of what they're, you know, the classes they're taking, the experiences they're having. And they'll often do so by creating sort of, you know, here are the institution 10 cards, or, you know, something that is kind of unique to the institution, although arguably you can only say problem solving or critical thinking in so many ways, right? But at the same time, if we're talking about the value of micro-credentialing and the sort of future of emerging credentialing as a pathway to close equity gaps and to close achievement gaps, that means that, you know, learning is a lifelong pursuit, and all of these skills that we're developing, whether sort of higher, you know, like soft skills or sort of technical skills with shorter half-lives, are going to need to be developed. Like, we're not going to just do it one time, 4 years, you know, undergraduate, one and done, right, kind of way. But so which would suggest that a need to have some agreement across institutions in that these are the skills, or this is the framework that we're all going to kind of, you know, agree to. And certainly in K-12 and also outside of the U.S., you know, there's some definition around it that often comes from regulatory bodies, whereas in the U.S., at least in higher education, we don't have that quite so much, you know. So I think that there's just this tension with this notion of wanting to create our own thing to make it sort of, you know, differentiated in the market as an institution of higher education, and the need to also recognize that students are going to be students in different flavors over the course of their entire lifetime. We need to recognize that and be welcoming to that as well. Anyway, I don't know. I also, sorry for my little soliloquy as well there.
No, it's all good.
I'll add something if I can, and then hop over to Laura. As somebody who's been trying to navigate this space, right? So you're right. You've got ONET skills, you've got essentially skills through MC, and then you have RSDs, right? Rich skill descriptors, and some other variations. But these are the three main categories that we're dealing with right now. Like, as we're trying to align micro credentials and digital credentials. As somebody who's tried to simply take a medical assistant CCMA certificate and translate into skills, my options are to go to ONET and to download there's 17 different skills, to go to MC Burning Glass, which may be around in 10 years or may be bankrupt in 10 years. We don't know. No offense, MC people or anybody's around, but this is a private company. Or to simply go through like Western Governor solution of where they've got the rich skill descriptors, of which there's 451 that are tied to a CCMA. right? And so right now the space is just starting to explore where the skill alignment is and what makes the most sense for each individual institution. I think that further highlights the need for a toolkit where somebody can talk through what some of this is. And they can say, well, if you use the RSDs that were developed by Western governors, then here's how they came up with their solution. Here's how Southern New Hampshire came up with their solution. Here's how ONET has built theirs. Here's how MC has built theirs. Now, which one more closely aligns with what you are trying to do as an institution? This is where the toolkit can provide real hands-on solutions for folks who are trying to solve problems. But with that, Laura.
I have a question for Adam. And then also just a reminder to the speakers that to build in a little break time for participants between this session and the next. So Adam, when you say, this group emerged from Wicked Problems last summer, thinking about that sort of coordination, or it's not oversight exactly, but almost like accrediting, services, or an accrediting body that would coordinate institutions of higher ed. So Adam, do you mean when there isn't a common framework, are you thinking about like the common European frameworks? I'm a language educator, so micro-credentialing just comes naturally to me. And there are frameworks like in Europe that help institutions kind of work towards the same outcomes and the same standards. Is that what you mean, Adam, by?
Yeah, maybe generally shared competencies that exist within a particular discipline, I guess you could say. I think that there's so much variability, and because in U.S. higher education, by and large, the curriculum is the purview of the individual faculty member, and we're talking about so much variability even within a department or even across sections of a particular course. So, how do we sort of perhaps allow for sort of the variability, the academic freedom that comes with that, but also sort of the point where we are at least sort of having a similar discussion. So when a person with a micro-credential in X, whether it's from here or there, there's a general sort of agreement on the value there. I mean, we put a lot of faith that there's a lot of agreement there when we think about transfer credit and things like that, but there's not necessarily, I mean, it's faith. I'm not sure.
Exactly. That's trust and faith. That's precisely what we've been working on, Adam. You have nailed it.
Love it. David, go for it.
Great discussion. And, I've had the privilege of getting to work with these folks for like a year on this topic. Something that's emerging in my mind, and I'd love to see addressed in some form in the toolkit, is when badges started, I thought, we saw them as a way to provide more clear signals and curriculum of the kinds of skills we want to focus on, and help students see that there was, something below the 4-year degree or the 2-year degree. And also to honor all kinds of learning that maybe wasn't necessarily getting transcripted. I'm all about that. But as this project, not our project, but the broader project continues, I start to worry that all we're really doing is disintermediating the resume to the benefit of industry machine learning algorithms that strip, for skills. And I just, there's a concern I have. I don't think it's overwhelming, but when I hear this, I feel like, are we unintentionally simply building a skills assembly line for the privilege of industry rather than doing our job, which is to teach well-rounded citizens? And so I just would like to sound a little alarm in some of our work.
I think it's a super great question. I mean, what we have now is we have a very expensive sorting process for employment, right? And so it's a lot of capital, it's a lot of time. I mean, these students engage for 120 semester hours. They take on $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 in debt. And what does it get them? Yeah, they learn things. Yeah, they're better for it. Yeah, all those other stuff, all that other stuff. But if the primary goal is to get a job, we've just introduced a very timely and expensive sorting mechanism to determine who's qualified for a job and not qualified for a job. So the question, I mean, as I hear what you're saying, like that's playing in my mind to say, well, are we building a system that is just simply going to replace that, but is equally inefficient? The answer is probably yes, unless we like legitimately get involved and help direct the work. I think as long as employers are saying, but this is what we want to see, and as long as faculty members are saying, but this is what I'm willing to give, and we're not providing any intermediary conversations between the two to talk about placement and context of skill-based learning and skill documentation, then I think what you've presented is a real risk. And we would have wasted not only a great opportunity, but a heck of a lot of time and energy from folks who are engaged in this space, and some really smart people will have been wasting their time on just simply an upgrade to a system that already doesn't seem to work particularly well. Laura.
Just very quickly, my daughter, Helen McDonald, spoke at our mini summit in April. And she didn't speak at the summit because she's my daughter. She spoke at the summit because she is thinks and talks about education all the time. I always tell her we should write a book. But David, she is still talking about that mini summit, and she's pushing back really hard. And she says all the things that you just said, David, and she just turned 20. So she has, she has some legitimate anxiety too. And she's an undergraduate. Good. And I certainly don't need to have the last word. Andrew and Robert.
Heck yeah, I'll claim it.
Yeah.
and then Robert can overrule me if he wants to. So these kinds of conversations are natural conversations, right? And so developing a safe space to have these kinds of conversations is critically important, right? Because while we're talking about micro-credentials and documentation of what students learn and so on and so forth, what is just upon the other edge of that hill is really documenting students' experiences and identities, right? And so this is an area that we will need to figure out as a community and as an industry. How exactly are we going to provide the truth and reality, documentation of what truth and reality is for our students? And so that can come in the form of gender, right? Gender identity, but it also can come in the form of, well, we say they had this English experience. How can we prove that they've had this English experience, right? So this technology that we're engaging, yeah, it overlays very nicely with the existing system that we have, but I'm not a see into the future kind of person, but I do think that it is pretty clear that we see that our traditional grading system, our traditional documentation system, and our traditional approach to documentation of student learning experiences is going to change dramatically because of this technology, right? We have the ability to do very amazing things with this technology. And so now we have the responsibility to step up and to help shape the conversation. And so if you find yourself having deep philosophical conversations as a byproduct of working through what micro-credentials are, you're probably stepping in the right space, because this is reconceptualizing in many cases of what we've been doing in higher education for a while. And it's filling in a lot of gaps and perhaps a lot of potholes along the way where we have told students that we're providing documentation of their learning when in fact we're just giving them a grade at the end of the semester, without providing the higher level fidelity conversation that can be exchanged in an employment marketplace. And that is super, super exciting, but it's confusing as all get out, which is why we need help navigating the space to be able to identify what we know and what we don't know, where we need to fill in gaps to help people who are embarking on this journey. So please participate in the toolkit. Robert, take us home.
Yeah, just in closing, I just want to remind everyone that it's about the learners. So they're the front and center. They're exactly why we're doing this. I don't wake up in the morning and say, man, I can't wait to talk about micro-credentials. Like what I'm really thinking is, man, I can't wait to improve the socioeconomic mobility of both traditional and non-traditional learners so that we can use this beautiful thing, higher education and all kinds of professional development, to connect learning experiences with career and other opportunities. And I think micro-credentials are probably the best tool for us to do that in the short term. So I really appreciate everyone joining the conversation, for joining Andrew and I. I encourage you to take a look at that survey, just like load it up on your computer, maybe look at it later, get a tab going, bookmark it, because your responses are really going to inform the direction of the project. And I'm honored that everyone would join. And thank you very much.